Okay. Actually, I can't see you when I put my glasses on, but I'm going to have to read this. Because this, I think, is going to last about an hour. Hopefully, I didn't hear any, oh. And somebody that came in, we were talking for a second, and I think it was Lexi. I said, well, this is autobiographical tonight. It's not a lecture on screenwriting. So if you want to go now, okay? Because once I start my story, I don't want you getting up and walking off, Madeline. What? And you're right here in front. So, but when they emailed me, it was about 4 or 5 months ago, to ask if I was interested in this. Hi, Cindy. I at first thought, that sounds nuts. You know, I got enough to do, and I think it'd take some time to really write something and get ready for this. And I don't know if I really need that right now. But as I thought about it, and this is what Lexi brought up when I said it was autobiographical. She says, oh, you never really talked about yourself much in class. And I never thought the class was about me. You know, and you guys know that, right? I mean, I sit back there in my chair, and you do most of the talking. You do most of the work. They just pay me to be there. That's the only difference, really. But I thought, well, there are some things I could say. And because, you know, I had a screenwriting career, and we've never talked much about that. A little here and there. I've brought it up. But it just never seemed that relevant. And, you know, the only time it was relevant when somebody asked me, well, how do I get into the film business or something like that? And I could say, well, this is how I got into it. But I did not want to give that talk tonight, how I got into it. And partly because I'm really bored by that talk. So if you want to know that, contact me. We'll have a meeting at Cucina, and we'll talk about, you know, how to get into the writing world. One of my students who's working in LA now, and he's, you know, he's making a living as a writer, but when I told him about this talk, he says, oh, I get it. Now you're going to tell them the secret about how you can absolutely sell a screenplay, you know, how it's a 100% assured thing. And I'm not going to do that, you know, because actually there is no such thing. But what I thought I would tell you about, because, you know, as you leave college, you know, I've had meetings with students who've wept as they're ready to graduate. And it was really difficult. Pity me, okay? It was really difficult, you know, talking to them because they were so afraid, knowing that they were going out into the world and unsure about where things were going to go with them and whatnot. You know, I know that from my own experience that you're going to go out and you're going to have disappointments and discouragement, no matter what you go into. I don't care what you finally choose, whether it is screenwriting or some other form of writing. You know, if you're in production or, you know, if you're not even in film at all. I'm sure there's some people here who've graduated in our film program and have not gone into film. They're doing something else, you know. So, you know, I thought, okay, maybe I'll just tell my story, because my story is fraught with discouragement and disappointment. And not just from film, but other things that kind of came together that created a number of years of really difficult times for me. And since many of you are artists, and for that reason you're sick soul people, you know, as am I, according to William James, you know, I know at some point you're more sensitive to things, and you're going to have some rough times, you know. So I thought I'd tell you about, number one, my rough times, and number two, how I got out of them. Because I had to fight my way out. They just didn't end. you know, which would have been great. But they stuck around until I finally acted upon them. So, and I wasn't smart enough to go see someone like Christian back there, Josephine's husband, who's a psychiatrist, and who is looking at me right now like, okay, Paul, this is what I've suspected all along. Anyway, but I'm going to read this mostly. There's a few personal little stories in here that I'm going to just talk, you know. And I'm going to trip all over myself for some of this, but we'll give it a try. So, Connor, do we have sound on the mic? Okay. Connor's filming this, and you're taking stills, I guess, Brendan? Or? Okay. Anyway, you know, in the little flyer I sent out, I said my reason for doing this was talking about staying alive. And I meant that literally staying alive, and I meant that also emotionally staying alive, and the two are obviously very connected. But the second thing thoughts that were going through my mind, the things that have been important to me over time is, what is reality? You know, I think we assume we know what reality is. We think these things are real and all that type of thing. But do you know, this is matter, right? Do you know that physics does not know what matter is? We just know some things about matter. That is amazing to me. All the science that we have, we just know some things about it. And we're taking a very specific look at it, which is probably excluding a whole lot of things. And it really plays into some of my thoughts about what we're going to talk about tonight. The last one is Jodorowsky, Alejandro Jodorowsky was an avant-garde filmmaker, still is, crazy guy. And most famous for the film he didn't make, which was Dune. And he got it started, and then they took it away from him. But all the artwork and all the stuff that he did, they used in Alien and all that stuff. And but they took Dune away from him. Really interesting guy, theater director, writer, lives in Paris, has for many years. And in a documentary about him, they asked him, what is the purpose of life? And I loved his answer. He said, to create your soul. So that stuck with me, and I put that in here at the very beginning of this, just to kind of keep that in mind, okay? So let's get going. And I actually have structured this like a screenplay. This is Act 1, introducing the protagonist and the situation, okay? Okay, open on. Family. My family was at times functional, and at other times not. My sister's back there. She's nodding. Okay. My father's drinking created a host of problems. My mother's screaming responses engineered a few more. My sisters and I grew up in periods of calm that were regularly broken by storm. I don't think we were all that different from many others. Religion. I was raised Mormon, but obviously we were not one of the stalwart families in the ward. In high school, I was drawn increasingly more to waves, pounding the shores of Half Moon Bay and Santa Cruz, than by church. Dropping down the face of a wave was the purest pleasure I thought possible. The last thing I thought I'd ever do was go on an LDS mission. But at age 20, I signed up and got shipped off to Germany. The first day I went door to door, we were accosted by a large German who ordered us out of the building. My equally big and former Special Forces companion said no. The German pushed him. My companion picked him up into the air by his coat and said no, once again, and threw him several feet down the hall. I was astounded by his strength. The German decided to let us stay. But my experience was a mixed bag on my mission. I didn't fit well into such a strictly regimented system. I liked the people, I didn't take to the system. And by church expectations, I was not very effective. After Germany, I entered BYU and soon got involved in politics. The war in Vietnam was raging, and many church and school leaders supported it. My friends and I publicly disagreed. In so doing, we crossed a line. It was expected that young Mormons would sustain and support their leaders' decisions, but how could we when they did things like this? The president of BYU was Ernest L. Wilkinson, and at the opening convocation, I think for Anne, when she was a freshman, he set out his political agenda, which is extremely conservative and supportive of the war in Vietnam. At the end of the talk, he asked everybody, and there were thousands, everybody who agreed with him to stand up. Most everybody did. They sat down, and then he said, "Who disagrees with me?" A handful of people stood up, and he said, "I invite you to go to the registrars and get your money back. We don't want you here." We, including Anne, a beautiful young woman I had recently met, began to agitate. One of my favorite events, Ernest L. came up with a little pamphlet out of a piece of paper, but folded over so we had 4 sides. And on it, he put scriptures supporting war, expounding actually the great merits of going to war and whatnot. It was called A Message to the Young Men of BYU. Our little group put together an alternative pamphlet, looked exactly like it, had all the same visuals and everything on it, called Another Message to the Young Men of BYU. Every Tuesday morning, they had a huge convocation at BYU. You can get an extra credit by going to it, you know. And so everybody signed up for it, and there were thousands of people in the field house, up in the Union there, their version of the Union. I was stationed in the field house, or in the ballroom, but thousands of people, and we had thousands and thousands of our pamphlets. And we were just handing up to everybody, just taking them as they go in, like they were getting an official BYU pamphlet, you know, until they looked at it, you know. Anyway, Ernest L. Wilkinson, and I only saw it on the big Jumbotron, but it was so beautiful because they had a close-up of him. Anyway, he was up there, and you could see him looking at this thing like this. And then finally he got up to open up the meeting. He walked forward, and he said, "Who is responsible?" Well, we'd signed our names on the back, so it wasn't a mystery who we are. And for that, we actually got written up in an anti-war book, and we were called the Provo 12. I thought it was pretty fancy. It was pretty easy, really. But we made the man's life as hard as we possibly could. We actually, at the end of the year, ran 2 of our people as candidates for president and vice president of the school, student body, and they won. Okay? It found out that a lot of the students didn't like the Vietnam War. We went around and talked to everybody personally, apartment buildings, everything. And it was amazing how much support there was for us. We won the election, and for 1 year, we were in charge of the student body funds, and which meant that we could bring in anti-war speakers, we could bring in anti-war movies and whatnot, and so we kept the place sizzling for that year. It was a lot of fun for us. It wasn't so much fun for the young Americans for freedom. Anyway, at the end of the year, let's see, meeting my future wife was the most important thing to happen at BYU, but something else emerged that has proven to be a lifelong quest. I wanted to become educated and to understand reality. To this end, I read anything to aim me in that direction, which included some science, much more of that after college, and a whole lot of history, literature, and philosophy. I studied the great thinkers, starting with the Greeks, and walked on through into modern times. Of the moderns, there were 4 I liked. You might look at some of these people: Soren Kierkegaard, Friedrich Nietzsche, Martin Heidegger, and Jean-Paul Sartre. I was going to talk about them, but I'm not, because when I timed the talk, it didn't work. But I'm going to bring up my favorite at that time, who's always been kind of a god for me, which is ironic. His name is Friedrich Nietzsche, and he's best known for saying God is dead. But he was my god. He didn't think a real God had actually died, but the belief was dying in the hearts of people, and that loss could lead to a tragedy because belief in God has set limits on brutality. If we were to survive as a species, we would have to take the strengths ascribed to God and instill them in ourselves, a basic Nietzschean idea. Nietzsche also attacked the modern tendency towards our becoming too rational, which he believed undercut our other senses, thereby cutting us off from life, making us weak and vulnerable. All the political battles had an impact on my church membership. And some of the books I'd read, especially Nietzsche, had an impact on my belief. When we left BYU and drove east in my VW bus, Ann and I left behind Mormonism and belief in God. Act 2. I was now an agnostic, not an atheist. That requires faith, okay? And as you'll see down the road, I was so done with faith at the time, I couldn't do it with atheism, but I was an agnostic, okay? I made no grand statements to that effect, but simply never spoke of God, nor went to church, or said a prayer. Ann and I went east, where we settled in Washington, D.C. Adventure was our naive goal, and we found it. Our intention was to live in and renovate old houses in one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in North America. In the first week, a man was gunned down in front of our apartment. A few weeks later, there was a gunfight next door. And so it went. A constant parade of violence marched around us, threatening to pull us in, and one afternoon, it finally did. We were working on a house. We were on the third floor, Ann, Mike, and I, and we heard some people downstairs, and I yelled down to them, "Be careful, this is a construction site." There were things that could get hurt. They said, "Well, would you come down here?" We came down the stairs to the second floor. There were 4 young black men, one of them holding a shotgun, the other one a pistol, both of them aimed at us. And so we kind of gasped a little bit, and they just said, "Down here." So Mike and I went down. Got down on the second floor. They pushed Mike to one side, me to the other. They held Mike with the pistol, and they set the shotgun on my nose right here. Single barrel shotgun. But man, I'm going to tell you, that barrel is big when it's here, okay? And it's scary when you look down it, and there's a young black man, and his finger is going like this on the trigger. He was scared. He was nervous. And so we stood there for a little while as one of the guys looked around, started grabbing our stuff and things like that. Then he went upstairs, and that made me nervous because Ann was up there with our young German Shepherd. I thought he'd killed the German Shepherd and maybe hurt Ann. So I started thinking, what can I do? And I'd been trained in martial arts, and I knew one thing, that the guy putting his shotgun right here had made a huge mistake. You know, I knew that if I pivoted my head to the right and cross-blocked with my left arm, that there was a 95% chance the shotgun would not blow my brains out. I was willing to take that risk, but the problem was the guy across the room had about 5 or 6 feet between him and Mike and was holding the pistol on Mike. And as I played the scene through my mind, I saw myself knocking the shotgun away, pushing the guy back and down, tripping him, to where they'd made me throw my framing hammer down, which had claws like that. In my mind, I had this all planned out. I was going to pick up the framing hammer and come straight down on him. But I realized I didn't have enough time to take the guy out with the pistol. He'd probably kill Mike, then me, then Ann. So the next thing, I just said, what can I do to get them out of here? I offered them money. What we didn't have right there, and we didn't have a huge amount of money on us, I said, if you leave right now, I'll give you $150 and I'll bring it tonight. I swear I'll do it. And the kid with the shotgun yelled up to the other guy and said, let's get out of here. He's going to give us money tonight. And the guy just came straight down the stairs like that. They picked up some of my tools, damn them, and including my framing hammer, and left. So that told me, it gave me a whole other perspective on life that day. I was enraged, for one thing. I got a gun shortly after that, and I was afraid anybody crossed my path, I was going to shoot them. Anyway, but we got through that. The second story I'm going to tell you is to break the mood right now, since everyone's kind of quiet. And they're looking at me now with different eyes. Anyway, the second story, I don't know if you guys know who Chris Matthews is. He's on television on Hardball. Anyway, we knew him in D.C. He was a press secretary to Ted Kennedy. And our friend who was in the Senate knew him. And so we had casual friends. We weren't good friends, casual friends. But he told us one day he had a mattress for sale. And Anna and I needed a double mattress. And we said, well, we're interested in that mattress. He said, well, come over to my place on a Sunday afternoon, which we did. He lived 5 stories up in this building, and the stairs were narrow and winding like this. And we got up to the top, and we sat around and talked and joked and everything for a while. And we looked at the mattress, tried it out. I mean, we just laid down for a minute. I could hear your thoughts, Brendan. Anyway, we said, yeah, we'll take this mattress. We picked it up and walked over and looked at those narrow, winding stairs, and the 3 of us said, that doesn't look good at all. That's going to be hard. But he had a balcony off the front, and he was on the 5th floor. We just thought we could drop that down to the sidewalk. There was nobody out on a Sunday. It was easy, So we said, okay, let's do it. So he and I picked it up and put it over there, and Ann got behind and gave it a shove like that, and off it went. And it was beautiful. It dropped for 2 stories, just like we had planned. But somewhere right around there, it suddenly nosed up like this and began to fly. And it was going, I don't know, 40 miles an hour, whatever, at that point, straight across the street, right towards a set of big windows. And we all stepped back. Oh, nobody said a word, just a gasp. And it went straight for those windows, and it was a wide street. It was going to be a perfect, right on the nose shot. But I don't know how many feet. Just before it, something really beautiful happened. It suddenly turned like this. And it did a beautiful turn around the street, right in front of that building. And it kept turning. We thought, well, it's going to come back and hit this. It didn't. It got over to the side like this, and we were near the end of the street. It straightened out suddenly, and the last we saw was this mattress just flying like this, passing the corner building and just disappearing. Not a word from the 3 of us. We just broke for the stairs as fast as we could, ran down, came out on the street, looked around a little bit, listened for sirens, and ran to the corner, and the 3 of us just peeked around the corner, afraid it was going to be like Dorothy in the house with a pair of shoes and legs sticking out like this. And you can imagine if someone was walking down the street like this and suddenly look, oh, a mattress. Anyway, amazingly, it landed on the sidewalk. It did a landing right next to my Volkswagen bus. We ran over it, looked around, threw it in the bus, and off we went. That's the last time we saw Chris Matthews. I think we were afraid to actually see each other again. But anyway, the last story, and this one is actually kind of relevant. The thing about the mattress, I was going to say, our world is full of uncertainty. Because there is uncertainty, there is fear. Okay? Those 2 things go together. We had a lot of fear that day, but it was funny. And when it was all worked out, we had a great laugh. A little different from the robbery. But this one is related to the robbery. We lived in this house, and we really were in one of the worst neighborhoods in the United States. I talked to a cop, and I told him where we lived, and he says, well, we won't patrol there. We just wait for a call, then we wait for massive force, and then we go. So he said, if anything happens, be armed and shoot to kill. Do not shoot to wound. He said, when you shoot to wound, they often turn on you and shoot you as well. So I took that very seriously. I'd had a shotgun on my nose. And anyway, late one night, 2 or 3 in the morning, my incredibly brilliant German Shepherd came over by the side of my bed and started growling. I was fast asleep. So my first awareness was hearing this growling, just very light growling, until I started to wake up, and then she just kind of let me know that something was going on. She didn't bark loud. She wasn't going to give anything away. And, but I could hear somebody had gotten into our house and was messing around downstairs. And in that neighborhood, that means you're usually about 60 seconds away from a confrontation that could mean death. And so I had my rifle. I always slept with my rifle right next to my bed. I just reached over like this, grabbed the rifle, and flipped the safety off. And the two of us got up, and she stopped growling. Now she knew I was awake, but she and I just walked very slowly so we couldn't be heard. I didn't want them to know, you know, that I wanted the element of surprise. Anyway, I went over to the staircase, which is a big staircase I had built. It was a big open one. And the stairs started on the ground floor, and they'd go up like this, hit a landing, then they go like this, hit a landing, and then up like this. So it was a big open space in between. And we were on the second floor. Whoever was there was on the first. So I stepped over to where this stairway was going up to the third floor, and it blocked me, gave me a little place to hide. And I hid there, and I started listening, and a second later, I could see him slowly creeping up the stairs. He was going to take us by surprise, he thought. Okay? He hit that first landing, then he turned and started up the stairs. I could see from the silhouette that he was a black man, which, and I don't mean to be racist, but in that neighborhood, you had to be careful about that, okay? Anyway, I lifted my rifle up, and I aimed it, just pulled it up like this. I'd been taught to shoot. And I just pulled my rifle up like this, and I got the bead on the back of his head, just like this. I knew I could kill him, and I was going to. And there was no way I was letting anybody sneak into our house and do that again. Anyway, so I stood there for a second, and I took a long breath. That's what you're supposed to do. Take a long breath, and then just start to let it out slowly. And as your breath goes out, you squeeze the trigger. You don't pull it, you squeeze it. And there's this little sweet spot when you can feel it click, and that's when the firing pin goes. Anyway, as I was starting to do that, I thought to myself, I'm sorry, guy. I'm sorry, but your life is over. And slowly squeezing back like that, I had to be within a tenth of a second of killing him. And a voice went off in my head. I don't know how or why or what, but a voice inside my head said, don't. And it came with such authority that it threw me into confusion and it paralyzed me a little bit. My finger just stopped and went off the trigger like that. And I stood there in confusion. About 2 seconds after I did that, the guy on the stairs went, don't shoot. Now his back was to me, okay? He said, don't shoot, it's me, Danielle. I said, oh shit, you know? And I lowered the rifle. Danielle was a friend of mine, a good friend of mine. He had lived with us like a year earlier when he was having hard times. He had a key to our house, hadn't told us he was coming, but he had gotten into trouble or something like that. He needed a place to stay. And he thought of us and he thought of his key, and he came. And I asked him, you know, when we all got a little settled, I said, why did you do that? You know, why did you put your hands up? He says, I have no idea. All I can say is at that moment, something told me you had a rifle aimed at my head. Anyway, the interesting thing is the experience that keeps me up at nights, and I may stay up tonight because I never think about this for a reason. I can't sleep after I think of this one. The robbery piece of cake, nothing. But me killing somebody, I would not have been your teacher. I would have spent at least 20 years in prison for second-degree murder and having a guy no forcible entry. He had a key, you know. Anyway, whatever that voice was, that saved my life and his life and everything else that I've done since then, which is not lost on me. Okay. Our time in the East Coast brought two major changes. Despite having left God and the M word behind, I had not taken up alcohol, perhaps because of what I'd seen with my father. However, at a well-lubricated party, my business partner appeared in front of me with what he called a double Manhattan. I'd been struggling to find a place in the party's craziness, and he thought this drink would help. It did. A few swallows and a whole lot of complicated reality went away. I found myself not caring or worrying about things that had been important only moments before, and that made me feel light. From that moment on, beer, wine, and whiskey were part of the mix for me. Number two change was I started writing screenplays. So really, you know, the whiskey and the screenwriting go together. So, you know, I don't think you can do one without the other, at least for a while, until you get on track. You know, and then you could jettison the other. Actually, you didn't hear that from me, okay? This is not, I was testing you, this is not university. Anyway, I fell in with a small group of film people, and I thought I could do it, write a screenplay. I was crazy about the Civil War at the time, so naturally I assumed everyone was waiting for a movie on that. I wrote a huge story that would have required billions of dollars to make and might have appealed to a few hundred history buffs, or eccentric bores, as my wife called us. The less said about that screenplay, the better. About the time the first screenplay was finished, Ann and I were married and we returned to the West. It was here in Salt Lake that I started writing in earnest and selling scripts. I'm going to mention a few of them because they're the reason I taught here, but I can just bring it up. Dominion was a horror story. I co-wrote it with a guy. We got it at greenlit at United Artists. Second Wind was a story about renewable energy. A long, long time ago, I believed in renewable energy. And about a guy, an engineer, who got tired of everything else, all the BS going on, gets a little place way up in the mountains and is putting up all his renewable energy type stuff, soft energy. And Mayday this was the piece that I did with George Romero. I met him at Sundance and I told him I'd seen Martin. And this is the little lesson for everybody. Nobody had seen Martin. I was one of 5 people in America who'd seen Martin because they had refused to rate it. And a little movie theater in Maryland ran it at midnight, so Ann and I went and saw it. You know, it was brilliant. It was an absolutely brilliant film, and he actually won the Director Award that year for that film, not an Academy Award. I forget who gave that one to him. But I met him at Sundance, told him I'd seen Martin. It was a brilliant film. That's what you say to any filmmaker you want to get in with. It was brilliant, okay? Okay, he said, oh, my son. Let's go talk. He said, there's a room over there. Let's get away from all these people, and you and I just go talk. You tell me how brilliant I am, and I'll let you in. And he did. He was actually, Romero is a wonderful guy. And we had a great hour in there just talking about movies and stuff. And at the end of it, I said, I have a movie. And he said, oh, I'll look at it. And he did. And he didn't do it because they had a business plan. Something you'll learn. Companies have business plans. It has to fit in. But they said, well, we might like to hire you. And so at the next Sundance, actually, they sent me a contract and said, we want you to be our writer. And so we met there and then started working with him and stuff. That was Mayday. Why We Dance was a commission piece here in Utah. I loved the film project. It was a post-nuclear exchange not huge exchange, small exchange. That's what they were talking about at that time, is survivable nuclear war, which I thought was the stupidest idea in the world. Like, we're now looking forward to survivable nuclear war. So we wrote this piece about how miserable it would be to survive in a limited exchange of nuclear weapons. Anyway, and the last one was Promises Kept, another commission piece. That was a great one. John Wise, the great director, came on board, and it was wonderful. It was like sitting and talking to him. He'd talk about my script, and he'd give me the visuals. And I thought, man, I didn't see that, you know? And this is a brilliant man, too. He won the Lifetime Achievement Award the year I worked with him. These were the 5 projects that were like my major ships at sea. It's like these things can go. They were at studios, TriStar, 20th Century, United Artists, Lorimar. The last one was a real active film studio. Anyway, these are the ones I was counting on. You know, I had a bunch of others that got either were commissions or options or that type of thing. But these were the 5. Anyway, so let's see. Make sure I got the right page here. This is the beginning of the crisis part of the story. I promised you. Okay? Right off, I'm going to use a brief flashback to add more background to what was introduced in Act 1, which is what we do in screenwriting. Add a little bit of information at a time. Never push it out there too fast, okay? So, at the story's opening, I mention my family situation. I bring it up because any number of my students have confided similar stories, and I know it is somewhat common, so I don't think I'm unusual in this, okay? The heated fights between my parents were my earliest experience with burning emotional pain and my first taste of hell, and it would eventually come back to haunt me. Okay, number 2, it was in Germany I got to know depression, and it arose because of religious fanaticism. Our mission president, I think he was a little crazy, but he had decided the reason we were the worst mission in the church, okay, was that we didn't have enough faith. And he said, in fact, that if we had enough faith, which we should have as messengers of God, we should be able to baptize a family a day, okay? And he went around thumping this, working everybody up and like this, and hellfire and damnation and stuff like that, and we all got like this, okay, the man's telling us we can do this. Let's go out and try. And so we went out into the world like that, you know, just working our butts off, and he came up with a little mission guidebook, a rule book. And in the rule book, it was big enough to fit in our pocket. He said, I want that with you all the time. You will confer with the book on everything you do. Don't make any choices. Read the rule book, because that will put you in alignment with God, okay? So, I mean, there's just a number of things like that. I did that for about 2 months, okay? It went totally against the grain for me, but I tried to fit myself into the system like that. At the end of 2 months, I woke up one morning, and I was keenly aware that I hated life. I groaned and then got up and dragged myself through another arduous day. Okay, the whole week went that way until I couldn't stand it anymore. Finally, I wrote the president a letter and said I wasn't going to do it his way anymore. I'd find my own way that worked for me. And after that, things went a little better on my mission. But I broke countless rules to get there. Amazingly, he let me do it. I can't believe it still. They have what they call traveling elders who go around and kind of check up on people and whatever, mentoring and all that time. They seem to visit me about twice as much as they visited anybody else. But he let me go. He let me do it. And I just figured out what I was going to do, which was mostly getting rid of the lessons, the 6 lessons, and just going out and talking to people, which I liked, actually. That was fun. Okay, this is midway, Act 2, okay? Remember, at the midway point of Act 2, there's a shift in the story. Whoops, I think I put the page down too soon. We're not at midway Act 2. Okay, here's another little thing. At BYU, when I came back, I didn't have that much depression, but I had migraine headaches for the first time. Okay, stress. You're holding stuff now, getting stressed. Okay, the other thing was anxiety attacks. Anybody here ever had an anxiety attack? Yeah, a bunch of you. Great. Good. We're brothers and sisters. Okay? They're strange, awful things. I could be listening to a piece of music in the evening as comfortable and settled as possible. And this happened one night with a Beethoven piece. He just lured me into this space, and then he hit me with one of those big things, you know, boom, like that. Okay? My anxiety went off the page. I mean, I just shot up like this, my eyes wide open, shaking all over the place. And true to form, this was for me anyway with anxiety attacks, I knew I wasn't going to go to bed that night. I was going to be wired and wired and wired. And the only antidote I ever figured out, and it sort of worked, was running. I put on my running shoes and I ran through the night, through Provo, through the dark streets of Provo. Hour after hour after hour was the only way to finally wear that down to where I could go back and lay down again. But stress. Okay, in DC, I began nursing the blues with the booze. And that was my medicine. You know, I wasn't an alcoholic. I was very aware of my father. But when things got a little iffy or something like that, alcohol was a pretty good remedy, you know, for a little while. It only lasts a little while. That's the thing about it. Then we came back to Salt Lake, and that's when depression really caught up with me. And for a couple of reasons. One was my career was unstable. I'm going to tell you a little bit. I don't want to depress the hell out of people. See, we're not in the room, so I can swear. Okay? But I'm going to tell you how those 5 projects died. And I've always thought of them as like in Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice. The merchant sends out ships, you know, and they all sink. I think that's how I think of what happened to those 5 ships I sent out into the night. Okay? Dominion was green-lighted at United Artists. The only problem was United Artists produced a film called Heaven's Gate, which was a colossal failure and embarrassment to American Express, which owned United Artists at that point. And they realized they had to dump the company. And that's exactly what they did. And our project went straight on down that hole with the rest of United Artists. So there was a greenlit project. It was going to happen. Money, everything was there. You know, big studio. Really one of the best studios ever. And they were gone. In a flash, they were gone. Let's see. I'm losing my notes here. Okay. The second one, Second Wind. Now, I had a major star in this one. Tom Selleck was the #1 star in Hollywood at the time when I got a hold of his agent. And she had read my first script and said, "You're a great writer. I'll read your next one." And she read it, phoned back and says, "This is great. My client's Tom Selleck. I want him to do this project." And, you know, that was tremendous. We celebrated, took the kids out to the spaghetti factory, you know, did the whole thing. And that deal got put together. TriStar Pictures picked it up. Spent a little time with Tom, a little time with Mary Steenburgen, who was this great actress who was going to star across from him. And everything was sailing along until Tom did a picture that didn't do well. And then suddenly, TriStar Pictures started to back out of the piece. You know, they didn't want to be part of it anymore because they didn't think Tom had a draw as a movie star. And it was interesting, too. They started attacking me in the script. And I said to the producer, "Why are they doing that? Last week they were saying it was great." She said, "Well, look at this. I'm a successful producer. They're not going to attack me. Tom's a big star, even though his movie stuff is down right now, but you don't offend big stars. Who are you, Paul? You know, you're a writer from Salt Lake. That's why they're going after you. A little bit of the politics of Hollywood, okay? I would have a bit of revenge on TriStar, which is nice. Comes later, though, okay? Number 3, Mayday. Okay, this one is one of those pieces you think it's going to happen because Romero's doing a piece with, it was written by Stephen King. And it's like Stephen King never fails, you know? He's one of the highest grossing writers of all time, okay? It failed. The movie failed. The Stephen King movie failed. It's like, that can't happen, you know? The laws of nature, something's gone wrong, but it failed. And so they, you know, the powers that be backed out of Mayday. The next one was a Why We Dance at 20th Century. Second Wind. This was the other interesting thing on the Tom Selleck piece. Who is it that wrote Jurassic Park? Crichton. Okay, it was a 2-picture deal. That's right, this is when it happened. 2-picture deal. Crichton was on the front end. I was on the back end. Okay? Stephen King on the front end, Paul Larsen on the back end. How can you go wrong, you know? Buy the Porsche, you know? Crichton's piece, that's probably the only thing he ever wrote for a film that flopped, you know? And so that's why that one went down. Why We Dance at 20th Century, crazy reason for that one. Promises Kept, just when we're getting ready to go to Australia and film it, they were bought out by Warner Brothers, and they dissolved all the movie projects that had not actually started production. You know, we're a short distance away, but so, you know, this is the Merchant of Venice. You know, this is, you know. Anyway, I bring this up here because I say depression was stalking me in Salt Lake. The second thing was now I had, Ann and I had 2 children to support, and I was doing it in a business that obviously was not stable altogether, okay? A little word of warning, okay? For those of you who think it's a sure deal, you know, it can be tough. Other people would have actually had success in my scenario. The Wall Street Journal proposed doing an article on me, actually. You know, a hard luck screenwriter. And I said, no, it's really not the way I want to be known. And it's like, you know. Anyway, but I was stressed. We had 2 little kids. Money was going up and down radically. You know, big check one week, but I never knew when the next check was going to come. And kids, man, they have big, hungry mouths. There were bouts of despondence in which I felt like everything was bleak and hopeless. It wasn't constant by any means. There were even long stretches that were relatively tranquil, but eventually those would spiral into dark moods that could last for days, if not more. And then it got worse. And the worst, this is a personal part. It's closer to my heart than the movie stuff. But my father committed suicide right at this time. And it took me by surprise, and it knocked me over. And beyond that, beyond the simple suicide, after we got him buried, I had a dream, and it was a telling dream. My dad was an airplane mechanic, come from a blue-collar neighborhood, and he worked for United Airlines on big jets. And I dreamt that I was in one of those jets, but all the seats were gone, all the carpeting, all the wall coverings, and all that was there was shiny, slippery steel, just like this, a big tube like that. And I saw myself suddenly inside that plane, and it was in a storm. And the plane was going like this, and every time it did this, I bounced and bounced. And as I started to get towards the rear of the plane, a door at the rear of the plane flew open and flew off. So there was a gaping hole in the plane, and I was swinging all over the place, getting closer and closer to that door. And finally, it bounced once and threw me at the hole. And I cut myself at the last second like this and was leaning out, looking down into the abyss, hanging on for all I was worth, okay? And the dream ended, okay? It was clear to me what that dream was about. My father had given me permission to kill myself if it ever got too hard, and it was hard. I took it as a threat. Midway, Act 2. The midway point, this is the real midway point. The story shifts in a sort of way, okay? And it moves us towards what might be crisis at the end of Act 2. But there's a shift in the story. Okay, all the ideas I'd absorbed from philosophy and psychology had no power against the undertow of this recurring darkness. It wears one down over time, and the only medicine for it was wine and whiskey. It was during one of these bleak periods when thoughts of the cold interior of that airplane were flashing through my mind, and I wondered if this would ever end, that I remembered something from my distant past and resolved to give it a try. Early one morning, in winter, while it was still dark, I sat up in bed, slipped on my sweatshirt, and flipped up the hood. It was cold, and our room was unheated. I paused a moment, and I stared at the dim shadows of the room. Finally, I closed my eyes and I said words to this effect. Look, if there is something or somebody out there and you can hear me, all I can say is that my life is really fucked up. From there, I laid out a few more things about how I was feeling. If it counted as a prayer, it wasn't anything like the ones I'd been taught, but it was sincere, even though I believed the effort most likely futile. What happened was subtle and might have been missed, but there was, in the dimness of that room, I felt a connection with something. It was slight, but even that mild impression lifted my mood, which was enough to get me to do it again the next morning. In philosophy, one would say that I had slipped from the intellectual mind into the intuitive, which comes from our feeling side. It's a direct way of knowing that does not rely on the intellect, but uses impressions as when one enters a room and senses that something is wrong or dangerous. It's like each of us having one of those huge radio telescopes inside us aimed at space, looking to pick up some alien signal or transmission. Nietzsche had warned about allowing the rational to dominate our other senses, that it would diminish this side of ourselves. But my search for what was real had always focused on books and intellectual analysis. Like so many of us modern types, I had turned away from the intuitive. But I was not wholly unfamiliar with it. That voice, which had stopped me from shooting my friend, had certainly come from that place. And I had had other experiences. When I was on my mission, I had several of these strange experiences, all I can say. We'd been tracking, and that's the worst thing. A lot of you guys don't know what that is, but that's Mormon hell. And anyway, you're going door to door. I can still remember the damn speech in German. And I said it so many times. But I give the speech, speech, no, not interested. Walk to the next door. Ba, 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 ba. Not interested. Boom. We do this hour after hour, day after day, month after month. It was deadening. And anyway, on the way home from one of those long sessions, we stopped at a little park. It was in a city, in a good-sized city. The park was surrounded by row houses, all tightly put up against each other. And there had to be at least 100 houses around us. Sat down on the bench, and I just sat down like this, you know, and didn't want to think of anything. The last thing I ever wanted to do was talk to a German, or use German, or anything like that. Sitting on the bench, the two of us, and I got this strong impression that we should get up, cross the park, and go to that house, right there. My first impression was, I don't want to go. I've done my time today, don't owe you anything, that type of thing. And it just bugged me. So I said to my companion, we need to go to that house and talk to those people. He said, okay. We got up, trudged across the park like this, the companion thinking, why did I get this guy? Okay. We got to the door and there were 3 bells going up because they're all multi-storied in these cities. He said, okay, which bell? It's really kind of goading me. I looked at them and I said, that one. We rang it. I hear this bum, 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 come down the stairs. It was a high school kid. We introduced ourselves, 2 Mormon missionaries, blah, 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 blah. He looked at us and said, you got to be kidding me. I'm doing a report on the Mormon Church, and I'm reading the Book of Mormon right now. Nobody else in Germany was reading the Book of Mormon. I guarantee you. We found the lone person, Another day, this companion and I just said, I'm not going to go door to door. There's just no way we're doing that again, What we're going to do is say a prayer. If there's somebody out there that wants it, whatever, God, the Spirit, whatever you say, better lead us there, So we walked through that city until finally, I think he was the one that said, I'm getting the feelings, this street. And so we walked down that street, we walked up to buildings, he says, it's in this building right here. We walked up to it and we looked at the nameplates and we went, oh my gosh. There was a Bretzing on there. His name was Bretzing, okay? And he was flabbergasted. So we rang the bell, they invited us in, we introduced, turned out they were distant cousins. But here's the deal. His family was trying to do genealogy on that side. There were no records. They came from East Germany. When the Russians came across, everything was lost. These people barely got out. But guess what they brought? The one thing they brought, the family records. It was amazing. This guy just said, I can't believe it. I'm going to get a hold of my dad. We're going to be able to actually do the genealogy for our family on this whole side, Which, even if you're not a Mormon, that's cool, okay? If you're a Mormon, it's a little more cool. But, but it was amazing. There we were, walked through that whole city, the one door, bang, like that. So I was familiar with the intuitive, I know it's out there. I know it's a power. It's just, I had stopped using it and just got rid of it, partly because it reeked of religion to me. And I didn't want any of that. Anyway, so it was the intuitive side that I had tuned into. My morning sessions had been going on for several months now. They had improved my emotional stability, but I was still prone to downward spirals. And along with them, there were ragged obsessions, some to do with money. You guys might relate to this. So I decided to experiment a bit with the intuitive and pose a question in one of these sweatshirt sessions to see if any guidance came along with that problem. This was a bit like George Costanza in Seinfeld when he decides to do the opposite of everything he would normally choose to do, which for him was a very good thing. Okay, so one morning I asked how to stop worrying about money. Putting it out there like that and then committing to whatever came struck me as potentially exciting. Like, whoa, I'm going to do something really unexpected here. Okay, an answer did come back, and it was so troubling that I shot up and screamed, "Fuck!" in my bed. What had impressed itself on my mind was that we should pay tithing. This is to solve your worries about money. Give some more of it away, For those who don't know what that is, one pays 10% of their income usually to their church. I raged against it, went into denial, did mental somersaults to get around it. However, my curiosity to experiment won out. And after having an intense conversation with Anne on the subject, we decided tentatively to do it. Okay? But it was a problem because money from the last film contract was rapidly dwindling, and as of yet, there was nothing new coming. We were into rationing already, so intellectually this made no sense. Even so, on the next Sunday, I snuck into the local ward house while the Mormons were all at meeting and shoved an envelope under the bishop's door. After that, I ran for it and escaped unnoticed. I had the feeling that if they found me out, they'd do something terrible to me, like force me to read the Book of Mormon again. Ann and I had sat down to ration even further to make up for the lost money. For those of you who are thinking this was really absurd, just think of it this way. Make it easier. We were going to run out of money soon anyway, and who knows, the odds with this might have been better than Wendover. The first item eliminated from the budget was health insurance, which felt risky with 2 little kids. It felt like we were walking on a tightrope, but we bit our lips and canceled it. So it was very interesting that a month later, a letter arrived from the Writers Guild stating that they had recently determined that TriStar Pictures owed my family 2 years of health insurance. Okay? Ann and I stared at each other. So it was very, perhaps now you're thinking, of course, I must have become a believer again. Okay? But you'd be wrong. I was still an agnostic. I had no idea what or who was pulling levers behind the curtain. Okay? Wasn't ready to ascribe it to something, per se. I only cared that it worked. I'm a pragmatist. Jodorowsky, that avant-garde filmmaker I mentioned at the beginning when asked about his beliefs and whatnot, said he was an atheist mystic. I laughed at that, and then I thought, that's brilliant. I think I'm an atheist mystic, too. But you got to understand what he means by that, and I'll get to that later, okay? It was a few months later, and the tithing thing had actually gone pretty well. I was earning money. We had the best health insurance on the planet, and someone had rented us for dirt cheap an incredible getaway house in the country, something we had wanted badly. So I thought I might pose another question. I was getting cocky. Okay? Another part of my depressive moods had centered on a sense of emptiness and disconnection. Life felt hollowed out. I knew these feelings were not only uncomfortable, but also dangerous. They made me vulnerable to the downward spiral. One morning, I asked for something that could give substance to my experience and received another very troubling impression. It would be good for you to return to your religion. Could have been anything else. Anything. Why that? You know? Climb a mountain, you know, cross the seas. But to return to the Mormon church was death. I just said shit. I pondered that for a bit. I had committed to following these intuitions in part because they took me in unexpected directions, which had the potential to be interesting. There was a curiosity about what would happen, but Mormonism was not interesting. This was not the uncharted journey I had in mind. When I brought it up with Ann, her response was perfect. Becoming a Mormon, she said, was about as attractive as telling your friends you were going to sell Amway. Some of you don't know what Amway is, okay? It was a company that got your friends to harass you into buying soap. That's how attractive it was to her and to me, okay? And she was right, but I decided to stay true to the rules of the game. Curiosity about where this might go won out, and we went to a meeting. The second week, the bishop asked to talk to me. I suppose he was curious about the envelopes with money that appeared under the door from time to time. He was a Polynesian with one of the most authentic smiles I'd ever encountered. He exuded life and friendliness and was unlike any Mormon leader I'd ever met. I liked him immediately. We spoke for a few minutes, and then he said, "I'd like you to teach Sunday school to the adults in the ward." I gawked at him and replied that I hadn't thought about any of this stuff for over 10 years. "Good time to start," he replied. "I've got a feeling about you." So suddenly I was a Sunday school teacher. but not the garden variety. If they wanted me, they were going to get me. Oftentimes, I challenge sacred cows. I was going to say crows, but that's like one lesson in which I stated bluntly that a woman's main purpose in life was not to be a wife and a mother. Some people grew so angry I was lucky they didn't have stones ready at hand. The same went for any meeting. One old man gave a lesson attacking Martin Luther King Jr. He was saying scandalous things, and I asked for his sources, which turned out to be bogus. At that point, the rest of the class woke up and joined me in challenging his lesson. Eventually, he pulled out a white handkerchief from his pocket and surrendered. From then on, whenever I raised my hand, he knew his rocket ship was going to crash. His head would drop, and he'd whisper, "Yes, Brother Larsen, you have a comment?" I've fantasized his tombstone reads, "I've seen the devil's raised hand." 6 months later, Sua, the Polynesian bishop, didn't fire me, but asked me to join him in the bishopric, which is a leadership position in the ward. Of the millions of Mormons in the world, he was perhaps the only one who would ever consider that. Sua impressed me beyond measure. He seemed only to care about the welfare of people, and if a rule got in the way, he'd break it. He had an energy and excitement about being alive that I envied. Now, as part of the bishopric, I was thrust into the lives of a lot of hurting people. Heartbreak, divorce, poverty, tons of illness, sex abuse, addictions. One young man we helped out of an addiction admitted in a talk that he had broken into many of our homes to buy meth. That's a great sacrament talk, I'll tell you. That was one of the greatest talks I've ever sat through, okay? One night, Sue and I had to stop a drunk husband from beating his wife and then get her out of there and move her away. At Christmas, money was given to us by a benefactor to buy gifts for poor children. When I asked one father what his kids wanted, he answered, "Do you think they could have pillows?" That's how much poverty there was. For Ann and I, the big one was the Tesh family. The young mother of 2 small boys was completely paralyzed with MS. Fred was doing all he could to support his family, but he'd been a rebel and didn't have a high school diploma. Couldn't make money. Sua asked us to help out, so Ann and I became close to them. For problems, and there were many, they came to us first. Some years passed this way, okay? My life had changed dramatically. I didn't have the time to focus on my own problems because I was so involved in everybody else's. It would seem then that this must have been my cure, right? No, okay? Like a sea monster hiding just below the surface, depression waited until the right moment and then sprang, nearly swallowing me in one bite. This was the night recounted at the opening of my film, Chasing a Good Day to Die, in which I sat in a room with a gun. I hadn't gotten to the bottom of anything, and in some fundamental way, the Mormon experiment was a failure, at least in getting me beyond despair. And on top of that, my 17-year-old child had followed in the family tradition and had become severely depressed. Okay. Now the story, and we're almost there. Now the story is about to take its most bizarre turn. My son needed help, badly. He'd seen doctors and been on antidepressants for over 2 years, and he was not getting better. In fact, his main doctor was pessimistic about his prospects. So once again, in an early morning session, I put it out there, and what came along in response was a Native American church ceremony in which peyote was the sacrament. That's an interesting one, huh? That goes down well with the bishop. A few weeks later, my son and I found ourselves in a teepee in a small town in central Utah. The ceremony was led by a long-haired mixed-origin man with a crazy gleam in his eye. He'd been trained to conduct the meeting in a traditional manner, but had dumped that when he allowed non-natives in. But his method was ingenious. 30 or so people took the medicine, as they called it, peyote, in a circle around a fire inside the teepee, and then he asked simple questions about their lives that became more probing as the night went on. Peyote is, of course, a hallucinogen. It also contains over 50 alkaloids, some of which are mildly toxic. The impact was curious and profound. If he asked a person why she was angry when she mentioned her mother, she got sick. The person often got sick with flu-like symptoms. If you tried to lie your way out of it, you got sick as well. If someone across the fire talked about their problems which mirrored yours, you got sick. Before long, people all around the circle were throwing up into conveniently supplied buckets. What was the point? Each time a person got sick, they were hitting on a buried issue, something they had not been willing to face. And here's the kicker. It was these issues that were undermining their emotional lives. This teepee was full of doctors, lawyers, CEOs, carpenters, teachers, architects, as well as mothers and fathers. They were not a bunch of hippies, but the solid core of our culture, and they were all getting sick, violently sick. I got torn to pieces in these ceremonies. Every time I turned around, someone was bringing up one of my hidden issues, which were now emerging into the light of day. And here's how it went one time. Okay, James, the roadman, looked my way. Think of us in this teepee, sitting over there. He's looking around. He looks over and he says, "So Paul," okay, that was a horrible sound when he called your name. Okay, "So Paul, you're a writer." "Yes, I am." "Do you want to write? Do you like to write?" "Love to." Now, there was a lie in that answer. Sometimes I hated it. Writing can be like a mistress you come to, horny as hell, and she refuses you sex. James then asked me, "Are you good at it?" "Damn good." Why do you use the word damn for something you love? Such an easy question. I knew I'd made a critical mistake as I felt the medicine swarm all over my half-truth like ravenous ants and then pull me down the anthill like in Indiana Jones movie number 4. Soon thereafter, I was hunched over a bucket, and all the while my son was by my side, having a much easier time. Now, just to be honest, there were times when a person got straight with themselves, when they squelched the lie inside them, and then the sickness subsided and even turned to ecstasy. It was amazing, ecstatic. All you had to do was find the lie you were hanging on. Not so easy. Those were nice moments, but the point of ceremonies was to burn away old resentments and anxieties so that a person could actually be free. I finally got things figured out, and then the ceremonies as well as my life went much better. This is what I finally understood on an existential level about the experience of many of us humans. Early in life, when distressing things happen, we protect ourselves with emotional defenses, which turn down the level of pain, but have a side effect of diminishing our ability to experience and enjoy life. Issues remain hidden by the defenses, but they're triggered all the time by events. Then our emotions become erratic and range all over the place. We struggle to avoid the unpleasant, get angry when the world stymies us, and finally we collapse into depression and exhaustion from the nightmare roller coaster ride. When I finished with those ceremonies, I knew something had fundamentally shifted. There were still issues that dogged me, and they were legion, but now I had a sense of how to face them. In consequence, depression evaporated like an early morning mist to reveal a beautiful landscape that I had lost sight of. And since then, and that was almost 20 years ago, life has turned into an experience worth relishing. So my first piece of advice, go find a peyote ceremony. Actually, I can't give you that advice peyote is a Schedule I drug. I have to point out you can get in trouble, okay, although the Constitution does support it, and usually they won't throw you in jail for too long. Okay, actually, I don't know exactly what any person should do. My history and my journey are different from yours. But if I was giving advice, I'd say look for practices that help you to open up, that support you facing your demons. I've been influenced by Buddhism. I still attend church, and I help run sweat lodges for kids in corrections. They all help. Perhaps some of you are wondering if I'm still agnostic or whether I've gone back to God. Okay, the answer is yes, no, and neither. Remember the avant-garde filmmaker Alejandro Jodorowsky, who called himself an atheist mystic? Both those terms seem to cancel each other out, which is probably his intention. To me, it's a rejection of all the definitions of what is called God, which are, for the most part, human concoctions and projections. That's the atheist part. The mystic half of that equation is that we can experience that something to which I felt connection. In AA, they call it a higher power, but then refuse to define it, leaving that to each individual. Some Native Americans call it a great spirit, and I'm drawn to that term because it's hard to pin down and becomes real only through relationship. However, it was that relationship that I was drawn into and which ultimately started my own history of transformation, which is still a work in progress. What that relationship means for anybody else is beyond me. Any one person is left to figure it out for themselves. But I'd like to think Jodorowsky is also right about the purpose of life, that we're here to create our souls. I know what it is to be discouraged and disappointed, and a fair share of that came through my screenwriting career, which is why I chose to give this talk. At one time, I was bitter about my failures. I came to see them as some kind of curse. In fact, back in the day when I began to open up to what I'll call God for the sake of convenience here, one of the first things I literally did was flip him off. That was my conversion. I don't give that one in sacrament meeting. But all that shifted. Now I see those hard times as part of the adventure. This journey I've described here tonight was not just about getting past despair, but also allowing one to open up to all life's possibilities. And that's what I'd like some of you to take away tonight. It's something we don't discuss in the classroom. If your interest is to embrace and relish life, make that your guiding intention and then start your journey. I can't say where it will go, but I'll venture a guess that it'll be worthwhile. Thanks. Thank you, Brendan. We missed you on Thursday. Okay. Great. Thanks for coming tonight, and thanks for the ASUU. So, yeah, great to see all of you. Okay.